Thanks for showing up. We really appreciate it. These new temporary times. We're going to try and keep doing this weekly. If we can't meet you in person, we're going to try at least meet digitally to discuss real estate and zoning specifically. This week, we're going to go over. I really appreciate the overwhelming support from our first Facebook Live last Thursday. We just presented L&I updates and took questions, but then the feedback and overwhelming support throughout the week was so much that we're like, let's do another one. It seems like people are, I don't know if you guys don't have anything better to do. I know I'm here, 24 hours right now locked in. It's really exciting, but we appreciate the support. This week it's going to be exciting. We're going to chat briefly on the L&I updates that we got over the last 7 days, and then there's going to be a nice case study that we're going to present for a couple projects that are going from RSA-5 zoning to RM-1 zoning. So it's going to be exciting. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. I have a presentation here to go over, and we'll get into it. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, looks good.
Awesome. Okay. So Rachel and Adam, why don't you guys just give a little intro, about PLG, and I'll let Scott chat architecturally about DB.
Sure. So Rachel and I are twins, as you know, as a lot of you may know. We deal in the legal side of real estate, anything from transactions, litigation, agreements, contracts, escrows, and Rachel's specialty, which is really zoning and land use, specifically when it comes to getting, approvals for zoning and variances.
Cool. And Scott, why don't you just explain your role and what you do at Designblendz?
I do architecture. I'm the director of architecture at Designblendz. We specialize in mainly residential and multifamily architecture in Philadelphia, but we also are well versed in any sort of commercial, mixed use sort of development. We've been working with PLG, the last couple years, going about a lot of successful projects in Philadelphia, two of which we'll talk about today. Great,
cool. Well, let's get into it. So L&I update, just to kind of give you a sense, if you guys aren't familiar with it, you guys need to become a part of the BIA. The BIA, the building industry, they are the forefront of the real estate community here in Philadelphia. And, recently I became a part of it about a year ago. But, they've been giving weekly updates. So we just wanted to kind of summarize the hour call we were on Wednesday. So Rachel, you want to just take a stab at some of these points?
Yeah, so any revised plans can be mailed in. If you can't submit them through Eclipse, they are uploading all of the older paper permits to try and allow people to submit all permits electronically, not just new submissions. So keep a lookout on their website or touch base with one of us and we'll be able to help you. But if you need to have them mailed in the meantime, make sure that they go to the front door because that's the only door that's open. You should be able to see all your paper permits, but they're working through that. As far as we've been in touch with as many agencies as we can to figure out what's going on, who's open, who isn't. We were told that the Art Commission, Historic Commission, and Planning will be opening up in May and June. We don't have a defined date yet. We will continue to keep people updated as we learn more. There will still be no civic design review, zoning board, or land bank because for CDR and zoning board, they can't require the RCOs to do the virtual meetings. In the land bank, I guess there's legislation from the state that requires them to meet in person. So those will probably be suspended until we get back, in person. But they will be working on various ways to expedite, so that we're not totally bottlenecked. Lastly, about OPA, I've gotten a lot of questions about OPA and abatements. Do not mail anything into OPA. They are closed. Do not mail it in. Hold on to it. Wait until they're open, bring it, get a time stamp. They are not going to be penalizing anybody for late filings during this time. That doesn't mean that your 2007 building permit that you didn't get submitted is now going to get an abatement, but anything you have now. And as a reminder, we can help you if you still want to close on properties but have something pending that hasn't been submitted. So talk to us offline about that. But that's our update for now. And as Brian said, we tune in every Wednesday not only to BAA, but we're involved in a lot of different calls. So we always are happy to help. Just email us if there was something that we didn't get to cover, but this is just a brief update.
Cool. And I didn't put it in here, but just kind of an update on construction. I am aware of multiple contractors, even including ourselves, that have been granted a waiver by the state only to do work that requires weatherproofing of a project. So if you have windows to put on, if you have a roof to put on, the government is granting allowance, and L&I is recognizing that as means, but you can't tile a bathroom. You're not doing anything other than those means to protect the real estate property and make it secure for who knows how long at the moment. So you guys have anything to add on that? Any additional?
So just say, if you're not sure, let us know. We've been getting a lot of questions, and we've been able to reach out to leadership. And also, we spend a lot of time on the websites of both L&I and the other agencies, continually updating. So if you're not sure, check with one of us first, because you'd rather not, be made an example of, or it's just not worth it at this time.
Yeah, I'd say we've been surprised. A few things have been able to go through that, in our initial thoughts, we didn't think would be able to happen right now. So like she said, if we don't know, we'll push it to who we know and see what can be done and what can't be done. But at least we can probably get a definitive answer.
Cool. All right. Well, let's move on. Let's get into it a little bit. So, what is RSA-5?
Yeah, this is what we're all here for. So I guess first, let me just start with like the ways our team and Designblendz gets involved when there's a single family to multifamily variance opportunity. We either see it through somebody comes to our office looking for a feasibility analysis. Basically, they're under contract on a project, or they're looking at a lot or buildings that are zoned this RSA-5 category, and they would like to do multifamily. Another way is that comes to our office is we've got existing structures that have already been illegally converted to multifamily, but they're actually legally zoned RSA-5 single family. A client, let's say, reaches out to Designblendz or us. They know they can't do multifamily on their lot, and they want to talk through the strategy, the design, how we implement it as a team. And just to give background before I go in and I ask the experts, which are Scott and Rachel, about how they go about do this and what they look for. I think it's worth mentioning, just for background, that Designblendz and PLG over even the last 2 years have done more than a dozen specific projects to an RSA-5 to a multifamily variance conversion successfully. To our record, we'll say we've never lost one that was rejected by the zoning board. We actually came back later that same year and got it passed through. So technically 0 blemishes for Designblendz and PLG on these. So basically, let me just ask Rachel first, kind of on the legal elements of it, and then Scott can add in what he sees. But what is RSA-5?
So RSA-5 is probably the most common zoning classification. If you type it on Atlas, it's all that yellow. It's residential single family attached. And it's got certain dimensional and use requirements. I think the most common use thing that we figure out with people is you can't do multifamily, you cannot do a duplex, you cannot do commercial. There's maybe one daycare you can do, family daycare, but it's a very limited residential zoning classification, and it's probably the most common in the city. And Scott can kind of go through some of the dimensional characteristics of it. Just really briefly, but it's probably the one we see the most common. And again, it's really a single family zoning classification.
And I just want to add before Scott jumps in, maybe it might be worth talking about the political side of things, kind of what we're seeing, because there's been a lot of movement. I think if people have been watching zoning, land use, but maybe we can get into that after. So for now, we can just jump in, but I just want to make sure everybody's aware, like we can kind of talk about political and what we've seen as far as the landscape changes.
Yeah, we'll get in there.
Yeah.
Sure.
Cool. Yeah. Just to talk about just general, like high level stuff, again, residential single family, this is the most dense single family that's allowed within Philadelphia. And as Rachel said, it is the most common throughout the city. You can kind of see the dimensional things there, 16-foot wide lot, 1,440 square feet. Those two only apply if it's a new subdivision. So if you have an existing lot that's 12 foot wide, you're fine, not a problem. It's already created. But if you have something, that's say 30 feet wide, that would be a problem to subdivide into two lots because you didn't have two 16-foot wide parcels if you subdivide that 30. 9-foot rear yard, 5-foot side yard if you want to have a side yard. We come up with that one a lot. And then 38 feet in height, as most of you know, is the highest height that you can do. That allows for 4 stories. Pretty much, that's about all you're going to get out of it. Most likely, 3 stories is done the majority of the time. Open area is basically what is left over on the lot from the building. So only the buildable area counts against this. There's a few different things that also play into this, such as balconies. Decks are excluded in RSA-5. There's a bunch of stuff that we can get into the weeds about. But for the majority, you can build 75% of the lot, 80% on a corner, which is going to give you your max building. The interesting thing and why RSA to RM-1, theoretically is the best is because the dimensional requirements are exactly identical.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can hit the dimensional criteria for RSA-5, you can only go for a use variance. Obviously that's ideal and minimizing the amount of variances that we're going for.
Great. And Scott, just a clarification, because we've had clients in the past, can you just confirm the open air percentages for people? Because in the past I've heard 70%, it looks like you have here 75. Can you just explain that a little more?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that confusion comes, there's an outdated zoning packet that floats around the internet. They updated the open area requirements about, 2 years ago at this point, maybe a year and a half, to give an additional 5% towards that building coverage. So it is 75% max that you can build on an intermediate lot, or middle lot specifically.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah, I would say we've caught not Designblendz, but other architects that we've worked with. I've looked at plans we got refusals, and it'll say, they had proposed what they thought was 30% open space, and they didn't realize the code had been updated. So there's an online code that actually gets updated as the legislators amend it. So that's really the best resource, not any of the printed out PDFs or the quick reference guides, because sometimes they change.
Yeah.
I've actually had that issue, which we clarified with the actual L&I department using an old PDF. So it's always good to be updated, and that's kind of what we're here for as well.
Yeah, Adam had a plans examiner that had the code section wrong on their own computer, like down at L&I.
It does happen. So
it happens.
Let's keep moving to the next one. So if I was a developer coming in, how do I start determining, what sites are best for the possibility of converting them, from an RSA-5 standard to an RM-1 standard? Maybe Rach, you want to start on that?
Yeah.
11.
The last thing I think is worth noticing too with RSA-5 and with RM-1, just from the previous slide, is parking. Parking is a huge concern in the city. I know we'll talk about that in some of the projects that we're going to cover, but residential districts don't permit accessory off-street parking access by a front street. So although you'll hear in a lot of this that different community groups and things want parking, remember that RSA-5 and RM-1 don't allow for that. So aside from your use variance, you typically will also see that variance as well, but it's something that's generally accepted. As far as what sites are best for RM-1 conversions or variances, larger existing structures. So if you have an existing structure that's say 6,000 square feet that's zone RSA-5, or even 2,500 square feet, or it's an old warehouse, or it's a church, things that it really wouldn't make sense to do single family, or the amount of reconstruction you'd have to do, would be a hardship.
Mm-hmm.
Oddly shaped lots that are larger than RSA-5, although we're going to go through a project where it's just a typical 16 by 60 or 70 foot lot. If you can get a lot that's maybe 25 feet wide by 106 or 109 feet deep, that's maybe oddly shaped so that you can't subdivide it, those are good sites. Lots near commercial corridors are also viable for it. There's a lot of areas they're trying to revamp, bring back commercial, Germantown Avenue, 51st and Market, 52nd and Mark, places like that, where they're trying to bring back, if you're near a commercial corridor, Lehigh Avenue, those are good sites. lots or existing structures that have a precedent for it. So we'll talk politically a little bit about remappings for a brief moment, but there are areas of the city that were, previously, one of the commercial mixed uses or RM-1. If you have some precedent in the zoning history for that, or the records of the property shows it was never single family, that can help. And then, anything that's aligned with the comprehensive plan can help. I mean, sometimes it doesn't help because sometimes the community groups don't agree with the comprehensive plan. I think that you should look at it to see what the city planning commission, RCOs, and the council has planned for the city in 2035. I think they're now going to have to work on like their 2050, but if you can speak to that alignment, that could be helpful. And then lastly, it's always worth looking and seeing, have there been other multifamily on the block already or not? Because that can be helpful. Have there been other variances? And I know that both Designblendz and ourselves keep a lot of data on that. So those are always really ripe lots. And then there are ones that just aren't, and we have to work a lot more strategy on how to get that done.
Cool. Let's keep moving. Scott, talk a little bit about what architectural considerations you want to go into when identifying these lots. From architectural view, a planning view, what am I looking at as a new investor or somebody that's trying to get into their first conversion or their first new construction?
These are the main considerations that really I try and push people towards to really think about before we go into any RCO or ZBA. And as we're kind of planning the project, I mean, one of the number one big things is the adjacent building heights. 38 feet is allowed in RSA-5, but if you have 2 stories next to you or it's a predominantly low block, that definitely plays a hand in the community. Even though you're not going to trigger a variance for it, they're still going to bring it up. And that can go the other way too. So if you have a lot of tall buildings, or warehouses that are around, that can also play to your benefit. Yep. Potentially.
Great.
Parking, obviously, as Rachel kind of pointed out before, is typically a big one. I will say it does vary a little bit by community. Mm-hmm. I've had communities where we were proposing front-loaded garages and they said, I don't want it. Like, don't do it. So, I mean, it really, I would kind of lean on us to, help guide you in where those communities are, or if we have experience, what they like about parking, what they don't like about parking. But it's always, I would say, a consideration when you're starting a project, if you want to provide it where it needs to be, what's the least impactful way that we could design it within a lot. Facade aesthetic, I think some cases you're never going to win with an RCO, but the general rule of thumb is if you're matching close to some of the existing framework within the community, that's preferred. Most people go to a community because they like it. They like to live there. So keeping in with character of what that community is usually the best way to go with the path to success.
Scott, and regarding just a quick question that came in from the audience relating to exactly that, can you chat about the front-loaded parking on a vacant parcel that have an approved curb cut, relating to that is, just maybe a little discussion around that piece.
For sure. So this is a huge misconception. People seem to think that because you have a curb cut means that you're allowed to do parking. Completely false. Curb cuts are allowed at will, really, by the streets department. What isn't allowed is specifically what's on the parcel. So front-loaded parking in an RSA-5 is strictly prohibited. And that is really what's going to generate the refusal. So regardless if you have a curb cut there or not, isn't really going to trigger any sort of leniency from the zoning perspective. Now, it definitely can give you an edge within the community if you have an existing curb cut that people aren't parking on currently. It can definitely give you a little bit of an edge, but that's about the only thing that you're gaining from that.
Great.
Yeah, I would just add to that it has to have a permit that says use as accessory off-street parking for that curb cut to be legal. It can't say a garage. It can't say storage. It has to say, so unless it says that, then your curb cut is not legalized for that use. It doesn't mean it's not legal in general, meaning the street, you went out there and carved it up yourself. But to Scott's point, it has to be legalized as accessory off-street parking. I'll also just, briefly mention that it does help just because a lot of times the way that community groups will do math is just, 3 units. If they're 2 bedrooms, that's that's at least, 8 to 12 people, that's 8 to 12 cars. But providing a curb cut that at least can bring off, let's say, 2 or 3 cars is better than not having a curb cut and having all of them on the street. So sometimes we'll try and make sure that if we're going to do a curb cut, that it at least brings more than just what it's taking off the street as far as, how many spaces we're getting. A lot of times what people will not appreciate is a curb cut because they think it takes away accessory off-street parking.
Yep.
Obviously, if you already have a curb cut, nobody's parking in front of it anyways. So.
Cool. Scott, chat about the livability of these things now.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's not.
Oh, I think Scott's breaking up a little bit. It's okay.
Best thing he said all day. No.
Rach, you want to chat about the
Zone.
livability, or
There he is.
Yeah, there he is.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're
Yep.
back.
All right, great. I was just saying, sorry about that, is that it's not necessarily a zoning issue what the units look like and their livability, but every RCO is going to want to see the plans. They're going to want to look at the units, how many bedrooms, the bathrooms, where they're located in relationship to the street. So it's important to think about those, and that goes into basement living areas, which is a big ZBA thing. The ZBA members don't like to see basement living areas, specifically bedrooms. There's ways to get around that, but it's a definite consideration when you're going to the ZBA, that you think about how it's laid out, where the spaces are. Do we have that? Is there a walkout? Basically, the ZBA thinks it's somewhat of an egress issue and/or looks like an overdevelopment in their eyes specifically. And then with any community, trash areas is big. There's a lot of trash on the streets. People don't want to see trash. They don't want to smell trash. So that's always a question that we get, is where is the trash located? Is it screened? Is it indoors? Is it ventilated? And kind of how we're designing that within the project, specifically for multifamily, as there's more than just one trash can, obviously, at that point.
Yep. Great. Let's keep moving. Adam, talk a little bit about political considerations a little bit, and how you and Rachel handle that.
Yeah, sure. So a lot of it, I just want to, start, what we're pointing out are a lot of the things we typically see, or since we've done, dozens, if not hundreds of projects during the course of a year, what we learn, there are a few points that are always hit, like trash cans, like parking. But as to, what Scott was saying, and Rachel, there are unique considerations. And that's being, what do the neighbors think? What does the council group that is overseeing this, what are they looking for? Which is usually laid out now in the 2035 comprehensive plan, about what are they really looking to have built in this area? What do they want more of? Like we were talking, maybe there's places that are going to be commercial corridors. And then, from there, I'll kind of let Rachel, speak to what she's seeing, because a lot of times, based on, the conversations she has almost daily, she can kind of talk to the typical questions that arise from the council perspective that she's going to need to answer for any project.
Cool.
I think, and Scott and I see this a lot because we go to every RCO meeting and all the zoning board meetings. I've had Adam step in for a bunch because we've had 2 in one night where we've gone to. Sometimes you'll design something, we walk in, we think oh my God, everyone's going to like this, or not. I don't think we don't think everyone's going to like it, but we don't think everyone's going to hate it. So I think as far as the political considerations are important, and I know Brian, I'd heard you mention this on a call, is that a lot of the city's zoned for single family. However, there's a big push for affordability in the city. However, if most of the lots are zoned RSA-5 and they require ground up new construction of an abatement that we just kind of have, how are you, and as many people probably know, getting LIHTC credits, new market tax credits, all of that is pretty competitive and difficult. How are we going to be able to do that? So a lot of times what we've done, and Scott and I talk about this a lot, and with our developers is, okay, if we're going to do a single family to a multifamily conversion, and you're going to do a triplex, let's say, or we did a project where it was an RTA 1 lot actually, and we originally proposed 16 units and got 14, but all of them were in a workforce housing price point. So sometimes there's some sellability to the RCOs and to the council office when you're doing a more affordable price point. Now, I want to say more affordable, and I think everyone should maybe try and develop that language, because when you go into some of these neighborhood groups where you're proposing, 3 one-bedroom apartments at $1,000, some of us here may say, oh, that's affordable compared to, let's say, Center City rents or, wherever you may be living. But in some of these neighborhoods, people are not ever, they're making $1,000 for an entire month. So $1,000 for a one bedroom is not affordable. It may be more affordable than a single family home that you're going to have to sell for $400,000 or up. So,
Right.
That's really important to look at and to understand that a lot of these conversations are emotions and opinions. It's not always founded in, let's say, an architectural perspective, like, could we add that? No, we can't because we need egress and stairways, or even from a legal perspective, why can't we just do all affordable housing, or why can't you go? Scott and I had an RCO meeting where they literally didn't even listen to the project at all. Like, I've never seen Scott come unhinged ever in these meetings. And this meeting, he was just like, kind of lost it a little bit because they kept pushing about affordable housing, but they couldn't give us answers about what does that mean? What's the price point? So, you just have to know how to handle some of that.
I think it's fair to, I think you would agree too. It's fair to say that being in a major city that's one of the poorest, if not the poorest, has brought like a lot of heat and a lot of issue to this concept of affordable. I know that almost everybody knows the city wants to provide more affordable units, but in their current mechanisms, which is a much larger discussion I don't want to get into right now, they can't figure out a way to do it effectively from their end. So they look to these private developers to kind of add some of this affordability. And I think the RCOs know that. And it just gets tough, and it's a really kind of on eggshell discussion, because like Rachel said, affordable doesn't really, even though it's written in the code, it doesn't really mean anything to a certain neighborhood. And so again, that's where we're going to, some of this stuff is really unique in understanding what the RCOs are looking for and what they're actually battling.
And when you go to these meetings, a lot of times I not only listen for our project, but I'll listen to everybody else's project. There was a time when we first started where I went to a lot of RCO meetings that I didn't need to go to just to hear, because you may think that they're all similar, but there may be something that's nuanced, to Strawberry Mansion on the 300 block of Sedgley that may be different than something on, the 1700 block of North 25th Street. And you'll get other projects, so it's worth listening. And to also understand that you may need to compromise. When you go through the variance project, although you may just have a variance for use in this instance, everything kind of gets looked at, from the facade to how many units to how big the backyard is to is there a porch, all these things. So just
they essentially pour over every nuance of the project, whether it matters or not.
And know what matters to you too. Like, Scott and I and developers a lot of times have a discussion, like, where's the wiggle room, right? So what are your rents? Is there any wiggle room on that? Are you, what parts of this are non-negotiable? Do you need X amount of units to make it work? That way we have to go in with a few more units in the event that we have to walk it down. So
I think it makes sense to start now. We should transition over to the case studies, because I think a lot of this, we should show real life examples of these applications with the RCOs and how stuff continues. So without further ado, I do want to turn it over to maybe, I guess, Rach, you want to dive into how the client came and what kind of cue this up?
Yeah,
so how you and Scott started tackling it.
This is funny. This is our first project that we ever did as PLC. And sorry, it's a problem having pets. So, and I remember thinking to Adam, like, oh yeah, like this is going to be so fun. This is the project we got. RSA-5 lot. It was about a 5,000 square foot lot. It was a client out of New York, amazing client of ours that we still have. And he was like, I want to do, I don't know how many units I want to do, but I want to do multifamily. I want to do parking. And my understanding of like the code and RCOs was a lot less involved 3 years ago than it is now, even coming out of council. So I was like, hey, do you have an architect? And he was like, no. And I was like, all right. So I was like, hey, and I tried to get Brian to meet with me for like, I sort of got months. Like when we first started, a good friend of ours, Chris Terry, was like, you got to
call me out. You can't call me out.
I have to call you out.
A busy guy.
Chris Terry, who's a good friend of ours, was like, you have to meet Brian Corcadoza, what they're doing at Designblendz. So I emailed him and was like, hey, could you meet with me? No response. And I got this client. I was like, we need an architect. He was like, yep, I'm available. Like any day of the week.
You got to provide value. That's one thing. You bring value, right? You love value.
I agree.
So
I agree.
we brought this project, and I always rely on Scott to tell me how many parking spaces we can have, if parking's even feasible, because sometimes it's not, and then how many units we can have, what looks greedy, what doesn't. So he kind of designed this project, but this is a client who literally came in, had bought this big lot. This is in the Tioga neighborhood of the city. I actually walked the block a bunch of times. I went out there and solicited for support, even for that's how controversial this one got. But this was a really big, and it was, as you can see from the bottom photo, it was also really oddly shaped. It had this like, it was straight back. I think it was like 109 feet deep, and it, oh no, 118 feet deep you have here. And then it had this L-shaped bump out, which I thought was really weird. What are we gonna do with that on a completely single family block? So that was
so this really checks a lot of those boxes. You know, if you go to like the top 6 things, oddly shaped, much larger.
Yeah, here we go.
There you go. Yeah. No, one more back, I think.
Oh, yeah, here goes. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Existing structures larger. The house next to it's big. The adjacent heights are a little bit taller. I don't know about the comprehensive plan on this one, Rachel. I don't think it necessarily applies necessarily.
Well, Erie Avenue is nearby. I think it's at the top of Erie Avenue, which I think had some commercial sites on it. I remember pulling every single property on this block, and there was a lot of multifamily too. Also, there was a ton of vacancy. I think that's also worth mentioning. Sometimes blocks that are good for RSA-5, if there's blocks where there's a ton of vacancy, you know, obviously if people could have built single family, they would in some of these places. So that was another consideration.
Yeah, it's a good argument to make for sure.
So Scott, what did you propose on this? What did you guys
All right, well, let's go to the next one, Brian.
I'll show it. Here we go.
There we go. Picture's worth 1,000 words.
Yeah, right.
So this is what we ended up with. So 10,000 square foot building, roughly 38 feet in height, 4 stories. We were unable to get 8 parking spaces, as you can see on the ground level there. We originally proposed 9 units on this. 1 unit being a ground level unit towards the rear of the property, and then 8 units on the next 3 floors going up. So what some of the main characteristics that we really took from this, from the neighborhood, was trying to fit the aesthetic of the neighborhood, or at least being with harmony of what that. So brick, mansard roofs, some dormers, you know, something that wasn't going to stick out necessarily. Utilize the curb cut in the same location that was already there. Again, just kind of trying to play into what was already there and not really creating more of a hardship on the existing street frontage than was already, you know, there previously.
Can we talk about the community group meeting?
We can for sure. Because it's interesting, you know, proposing something and you go into some of these things being like, all right, well, I think we made all the right moves. We made it look like the adjacent. It's not really tall from what is next to it. We brought all this parking. You know, like what are they not going to like about this, Rachel?
They like none of it.
which is their right.
Architectural is very subjective. You know,
Yes.
It's not 1 + 1 = 2. Sometimes it's 1 + 1 = 9 units.
I think it was especially surprising because I'd actually walked around with the client to every single house on the block where there were people, because when we were proposing this, it was really nice weather. So we walked around, we talked to people, and the people next door, I mean, and around the block seemed cool with it. I know that parking was a big concern, but also that was because this lot was used for parking illegally by a lot of people who also lived on that block. So I think we went into the community meeting feeling one way, and it was so great of a meeting that Scott and Cortland hid behind the poster. But what it taught us a lot was like, all right, we're going to need to like either try to get a lot of near neighbor support for this, really have a serious conversation with the council office, or figure out how we can compromise on some of the concerns, given we're not going to get, you know, an overwhelming letter of support for this.
Great. So what actually ended up happening? Did we get 9 units, or what was the outcome?
Drum roll, please.
All right, drum roll. It's next slide, right? Oh, okay.
There we go, Brad.
At the zoning board of adjustment hearing, there wasn't like a ton of people came out in opposition, but a couple of people did. And I think what we mainly expressed to the board was their hardship argument, which was that it was almost 5,000, a little more than 5,000 square foot lot. We weren't able to subdivide it because it was 25 feet wide, so we wouldn't get the required 16 feet in width. It was weirdly shaped, so even if we did chop it up, it would still look good. And then we really did a good job with comps and the size of what the homes would look like in addition to the existing homes around it. And we did tie in comprehensive plan for this. We ultimately negotiated it down to 6 units from the 9. We had a conversation with the client ahead of time. Hey, listen, if we need to walk it back, where's the minimum that you could? And more so his concern was bedroom count than it was units. So we were able to assure him that we'd still be able to achieve the number of bedrooms that we would need. And if we cut it down. So, and the parking, we didn't have to cut down at all, although there was, some pushback from the RCOs about the
but at least, parking wise, it looks like, we get 1.2 spots, per unit.
That was probably the biggest thing from the RCO was literally parking.
Mm-hmm.
The one lady said she had 4 cars and she needed to park them all on the street. It sounds ridiculous, but she's like, everyone's probably like me. So you're going to have 9 units and they're all going to have 3 cars apiece. And, it's 27 cars.
Yeah.
All right. So great. So, and also too, I just want to mention, if you guys have questions along the way, just put them in the group chat here or on Facebook. If you're watching live, just put a comment there and we'll try to answer them.
I just want to put one close to this one, and that's that this, just because you don't have support initially doesn't mean you have to abandon the project. This is one where it made logical sense, and we determined from the knowledge we all had that it was still worth pushing through for our client, and ultimately the board saw that and was able to compromise in a way.
So we got letters of support. So we door knocked. I know that because I went with the client. We door knocked. We got letters of support and petitions of support because, as people may know, you can sometimes go to these meetings and there's a couple loud voices in the room or longstanding people who come a lot to these meetings and just are opposed to maybe development in general, or they don't like, change and things like that. But we went and sometimes when you speak to people one-on-one, there are people who want to see change and a difference, and maybe they don't like an element or two of it, but they don't oppose the project. They just may not feel comfortable speaking up. The other thing, people think, oh, if I don't get the RCO support and I don't get the council support, then the board's not going to support it. This board, because of the makeup of it and also because the experience that the chairman has, is both he was a councilman for the first councilmanic district, and he was also involved with lobbying and private development and other business entities and things like that. He really does like to try and compromise as long as it's reasonable and it's not greedy. So it was one of those that we really felt like it was important to still bring through. In addition to, let's do some market research on what the comps are. I always say this to Scott, what does it look like if we provide 3 units? How big is it if we provide 5? And really, Scott does such a good job of really what I call defending the design of what really it will do to the project if we alter it. So
great.
We were very happy with this.
Let's move on to the next one because we got another case. We have 20 minutes. I do want to save some time for questions too at the end. What is next? North 25th Street. Oh boy, look at this one.
So this is a client of ours who owns a lot of real estate in North Philly specifically. And this was just a typical lot. This was almost 16 by 72, 71. There was nothing special about this. It was an infill site on a block of all RSA-5, as you can see from the bottom left. There was some RM-1 on nearby, but this was a pure RSA-5 block. Again, nothing special about this lot. And what he came to us with was wanting a triplex on this lot. And I had dug up, I always look at every single property in the block to look at the zoning archive. There was a little bit of a mix, but the infrastructure was pretty old. And this was one of those that that we were like, we really need community support, or we're not this is gonna be tough. So,
cool. What did we first propose architecturally, Scott? You want to dive into that?
Yeah, so initially, the first thing we proposed was a 4-story triplex, similar to a lot of other projects in the neighborhood that were going on at the time, on a little bit more of a commercial corridor necessarily, but also, with on 25th Street, there's some RM-1, so, this does fit that bill necessarily. So you can kind of see proposed what a 4-story on this block looks like. No parking, which was typical for this area within Brewery Town necessarily. Maximum area, total building, it's about 4,000 square feet. Units were very generously sized. in general. So, I mean, they could be used for family or more affordable living than, you know, owning a single family home necessarily.
Great. So what did they think originally of this, Rach, when we went and presented it?
So we actually presented this with two projects. One was on this side of the block and one was on the other side of the block. So we did two projects at once on the same block. Their response to this project was not favorable. I think because we did two at once, which we probably wouldn't recommend always doing it that way, there was just a distaste for multifamily. A lot of areas in North Philly near Brewerytown have seen a lot of these types of conversions and aren't always as favorable to it. I think that for this project in particular, they were definitely, because of the mix on the block, I had literally brought the zoning archive and made a chart of like, here's all the properties on this block that are multifamily. And some people that were at the meeting were like, yeah, that's true, I do live there. They understood maybe the multifamily concept. They hated the height. I think that was probably one of the main sticking points was the height. And then obviously the concern about, you know, which is not zoning or architecture related, but just transient ownership. There's a big sentiment in Philadelphia for home ownership. So that was really this meeting, and it was not, they were not a fan of the height or necessarily this amount of density.
Great. So I'm assuming did the building took a haircut to some extent?
Well, so when we went to the zoning board, we had relayed this to the client who was obviously at the meeting, and he felt like we should still go forward with the triplex, given the fact that there were some comps on, you know, nearby. The church at the end was tall, you know, 38 feet is allowed as of right in the zoning code. And, you know, we can only advise people, but that's kind of what the sentiment from him was. You know, there were some other political considerations that I had mentioned as to why I thought we should continue it. But ultimately, you know, we went forward with it at the zoning board. There was people who showed up to the zoning board hearing, in addition to someone from the council office who showed up as well in opposition. And it was a straight absolutely not. So that was the project.
You want to talk about the architectural changes then that happened because of this?
Do you want to go, Brian, go to the next slide, please?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Sorry.
Yeah, so kind of talking through some of these things, you know, obviously when we went to the zoning board of adjustment, they did not like it. And even though we checked some of these boxes necessarily that kind of fit, you know, we tied in the materials to the existing houses on the block and what the neighborhood typically looks like, limestone, brick, not doing anything kind of out of character. You know, the church is high, this is kind of tall, you know, that kind of works. Sometimes, you know, the neighborhood just is, they have their ways necessarily. And that's kind of, I think, what happened here when we wanted to push the envelope a little bit more. So at that point, we were able to talk to not only the council, but the client and kind of figure out a new strategy to get something out of this. And if it wasn't 3 units, you know, what is doable?
We circled back with the RCO and kind of were like, all right, if you hate this, then what might work besides just a single family? And there's just to talk about reapplying when you get denied. Generally, the reason why you'd like sometimes want to continue stuff or maybe go back and meet with RCO again is because if you get denied at the zoning board of adjustment, there's new legislation. I think this is from a couple years ago, but you have to wait 1 year to submit a project that's substantially similar. That means that if Scott and I got denied and the client got denied and Scott was like, hey, I'm just going to change it to like maybe like black brick, but let's do the same thing. Like that would be absolutely, or he's like, I'm going to move a bathroom here, but it's still going to be 3 units, still same height. That's not.
If I'm like, oh, let's make it 37 3/4 feet instead of 38.
Change would have to be from 3 units to 2 units is what you're saying.
You have to make a change. And really we spent some time talking to the city solicitor for the zoning board of adjustment to understand what substantially similar means, because there's not really a code definition for it. And she'd let us know if you're changing the unit count, if you were significantly reducing the height, if you were going to maybe add or reduce a commercial component, that would be something that, you know, they would go through. But you always want to check with them to make sure, because you don't want to spend the time on the ARC side or with us and then just to get it, you know, rejected again. So, and again, we took the feedback from the community and said, what do you think, what adjustments do you think we could get through? And I had some political conversations as well with the council office to make sure that we weren't going to go reapply and spend time, because you have to start over again, all the way again. You have to literally resubmit, your plans, your zoning schematics back to L&I. It's not like you take a shortcut, get leave of the board and amend anything. You have to start all over again.
Yeah.
So you really want to be sure, on your design and that you could get the support you needed.
So then what did we end up doing after this? Want to dive in? Oh,
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Brian, you want to flip the next slide? There you go.
sorry.
The slides are good.
You guys say next.
So as you can see, we basically took a story off of this, reduced down to 2 units instead of 3, which ultimately I think was probably the right move here. Looking at the block, it doesn't really stick out as something that doesn't belong on the block. And providing 2 units still gives, an increase in density, which obviously is an increase in value from originally what it is. This isn't a lot that's not developable as single family necessarily, which, is the real challenge of this. But able to going back and kind of make those tweaks to really just slide out a 1-bedroom unit to this doesn't drastically change the end goal, I think, from a development standpoint on this, which is really good.
And the community felt like they were heard. And some of this also is, when you have a client who either has a lot of properties in one area or is looking to kind of stay developing in, either one area or a couple areas where you're going to interface with the same community group, you have to kind of consider some long-term vision of how you approach it. And for us, it was, to kind of make it palatable for them so that they felt like they were heard. We could make adjustments, but something also that from an economic standpoint that the client it still made sense for the client. But also, again, having long-term vision and saying, if we make these tweaks for this one project, it'll help us get through what has been a number of other projects, which we've done a lot more units, a lot bigger. We've done commercial for this client in particular. So with the same group. So it just kind of left a better taste, and it went through like really seamlessly the second time. And so that was really great.
Keep in mind, the city is very small. I can promise you that, if you treat people right, you're taken care of. If you treat people wrong, word happens to get around.
Yeah, and that's why I think we all do so many projects together, because that's kind of the style, and we put that up front to our clients. Like, think of this with long-term vision.
Yeah, we don't want to be in a position as a design firm, or Rachel and Adam don't want to be in a position where they're trying to force something that's not going to work, because, we're looking out for the benefit of all development here in the city, not just you and this one project. We have to look as a holistic community and how do we build a better built environment. And, it starts with the planning phases. It starts with making sure that we're doing something that the neighborhood can live with and enjoys having in their community, not something where they have to walk out every day and feel negative energy every time they leave their front door. So it's big, it's important.
Plus, we have these relationships that we've spent a lot of time on, and, for me politically and for Scott, who has to go in front of these groups with me and propose these projects, and Brian, who gets calls, and Adam, who gets involved. It's really important for us too that we should be transparent with our clients. Like, hey, I'm not telling you not to do 300 units because I don't want you to have 300 units. It's because we know these neighborhood groups. We've done so much work in some areas. I get calls for this group in particular. I get calls about other projects. Like, hey, by the way, you should talk to so-and-so. We hate what they're proposing. Or, hey, do you have any developers that'd be willing to do this? Or we would be happy to help with that thing. So you really can develop good relationships. And the only reason we would say, and when I said to the client, hey, let's continue it or do this, is because I know how Ultimate's going to turn out. Mm-hmm. It's like Groundhog's Day. You do enough of them, but and to the last point of that is just, that's why it's important in the beginning, like, let us really know what your bottom line is, because we don't ever want to negotiate against your interests. We want to get things approved and move forward. But, it's important to know that going into, and we've done a ton of feasibility analysis, but I've been like, let's not worth taking the case. Cool. Like, it's just not going to happen.
Yep. Okay, and obviously, Scott, it looks like we got approved 2 units, 3,100 square feet. I mean, it's the only thing that changed was the unit count.
Just the units.
Great. Anything additional on this one specifically? Or I think the next thing for us is to take questions.
I think just to wrap that up, again, we've done a ton of different variance cases. And specifically, we showed these 2 just because we thought they were a good indication of what to look for in RSA-5 a lot. And even the more challenging ones, one that we didn't even have success on initially, which honestly this is the only one that happened like that. But it's good to know kind of also where the faults are and what to look out for, which is really what we want to focus on with people, to know like what not to look for sometimes, or what are the biggest challenges, and what are the risks that you're going to face going through this process.
And shout out to Rahat, who's in the chat here. We appreciate it. If you guys are curious on some of the projects he's doing, and being a responsible developer, to to Robin Miller's comment, who's in the audience on Facebook, mentioning about, I'd like to see developers behave as if it was their neighborhood, and what sort of behavior and property they would withstand. Rahat's a great example of that. Someone that's investing, living, and improving the community he's a part of. So definitely check out his development.
Rahat gets a major shout out, because he'll give Scott and I some credit for his, but he and Justin and their partner do so much legwork and groundwork, and it's such a team collaborative effort that we got 23 units on an RSA-5 lot. However, it's because of the way that it all went about, and all of us being kind of aligned in doing that way. So all that stuff's possible. Again, it's just how we go about it. And I think sort of the team chemistry of that, and understanding what we're proposing. And you can get a lot more done than you think, especially on RSA-5 sites. It's all about how.
You get more with honey than you do with sugar, something like that. Is that the term?
Yeah.
All right.
That's the reason we started this. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let's. So obviously, I put up one of the comments. Please, it was asking what's the contact information from last week. I put it here. I just have it up here while you ask questions. I also, I'm going to put in the chat here too, and I'll put it on Facebook as well. There's a link, a form we created. If you guys have just any questions that come up throughout the week, just in general, we'll try to address them too at the end here. But also, please give us topic suggestions. We have a few more. We're going to keep doing this weekly for as long as we're here. And people ask me, when are you shaving your beard? I said, not till we have a cure. So we're going to keep this thing going until we're out of this and we all come out stronger. But if you have questions, please post them up there. Oh shoot, I got to post it to everyone. Here you go. So let's just start off. I got a question from George. Rachel, this one's to you. Rachel mentioned that Planning Commission is closed until May/June. Are they stamping zoning applications currently? Thanks.
I don't think there's stamping plans. Like, you can't go in there and get plans stamped, but I do know that you can, some from the mixed income stuff, some of those forms, you can have them emailed. Scott, do you know if they open that up on Eclipse, or they don't have access to that on Eclipse to stamp?
Correct. So right now they are not stamping any plans, to my knowledge. So there's prerequisite approvals for streets in Philadelphia Water Department on Eclipse. Planning Commission not being open is not doing that right now.
You can get the
so
mixed
my
income form done.
Correct.
That's it. So if anyone's doing a mixed income housing bonus, there's no bonuses allowed for RSA-5, just so you know. So you have to go variance wise. But if you do RM-1 all the way up, and want to talk about mixed income housing bonus, that is something Planning Commission is still doing.
I would suggest, if you need a Planning Commission stamp on something like, let's say, zoning on a corner or something like that, just submit it through Eclipse. It's not going to hold you up necessarily. It's worth just getting that initial review, and if you have to wait till they open back up to finalize it, that's minor at that point.
Great. Another question from the audience. This one's from Jamie Solar. What are some of the ways you've convinced neighborhood peeps to support you?
Shout out to Jamie Solar, who's my stepsister. Some of the ways we get them, for the 16th Street project in particular, I walked around with a copy of the plans and literally door knocked and just said, hey, this is what we're proposing. Here's a copy. And I brought like 50 copies. Here's copies of the plans. And for some people, I would sit on the porch and just go through it with them. I don't do that for every client. There's sometimes that if a client doesn't want to do door knocking, or they're not comfortable, or they want me to go with them, I will. I really enjoy that kind of engagement. So it's just being honest and transparent with people and not getting offended. Like, if people are like, we hate it, like, I'm not like, well, I hate you. I understand that, is there any elements you do like, or, is there something that we could do that would make it, more interesting for you? It's really just being honest and transparent. I think that people feel like either you talk over their head with certain terms. I never go into a meeting going, well, section 16 point, I just kind of use normal language, answer questions that they have, and just have a dialogue. And it doesn't always go well. And I bring, letters of support or petitions with us, or I invite them to come to the meeting. there's a lot of times, because we have to send these mailers out to people, that I get phone calls and people think that like they're in trouble with the city for whatever reason, because they just get these mailers that say like RCO meeting, and they call me and they're like, okay, so I'm not in trouble with the city. I'm like,
Can I just add one thing as an insider outsider watching Scott and Rachel? These projects are created, like for most part with our clients, to be malleable. Like we don't go in thinking every time we're going to push really hard. And we talk to our clients about that. We're not going to push, super hard on a project and push it through no matter what. That's just not how we operate. So when we listen, you hear feedback, you come to that meeting and people see that their change and their voice was heard in it, even if it's something small and makes sense to the client. Like that's basically what I think is the special sauce. And it's that like, they're seeing it, they're hearing it. So like you're asking, what have we done to convince? Well, if somebody comes up with something good and we think's reasonable that the neighborhood we keep seeing over and over again, you're likely to see it in the vision that we display and in the architecture, and how we're seeing it.
There's just so many times where Scott and I just know these neighborhoods so well because we've just done so many, know them well in the sense of what they're not going to like, not saying we know everything about them, but that we make sure to design a project that we know it might get a little bit more favorable reaction. And also the other thing is just trust. I mean, how do you get people to like you? You just build trust with them over time. It took me, there's people in city council that it's taken me 5 years to get them to like me and not think I'm like out to develop the whole city or anything crazy. It's just people trust you when they see that their input is reflected. And then you also just have to know, like, there's just going to sometimes be people that just aren't going to like it no matter what you do. And you just have to be cool with that. Just don't take it personally.
We'll try to get one more in. Brian, if you think.
Yeah, I got one more question. This one's, Scott, this one's probably for you. Staircases. When are 2 staircases required? And I feel like
I told Abe to ask this. Scott knows this stuff so well.
Scott, when do you do 2 staircases? And
maybe we'll have a whole thing about this one.
we might do a whole one on staircases.
It's a whole presentation in itself.
It's good.
Long story short, anytime that you have a 4-story building that is more than 3 units within it is when you're going to need 2 staircases.
Okay, so I just want to clarify for guys like me that don't do this every day, right? 4 stories with more than 3 units. So it's a 4-story, 4-unit. I need 2 means of stairs. I need 2 staircases. Did I get that right?
Triplex.
Triplex or up. So 3 units and above.
Yes.
So if I have a duplex that's 4 stories, I only need 1 means.
Correct.
All right, I think I got it. That's perfect. Amazing.
Yeah, and that's a very common question, and there's ways in and around that that we can help minimize and design, and kind of when is it appropriate, when is it not appropriate, little tips and tricks. And maybe that's something that we eventually can go over and some workarounds and how to figure out, when it's appropriate, when it's not appropriate to kind of go for that.
We should definitely do one. I know Abe said he has to jump off. We should do one maybe on that and then roof decks, because I know that it's come up a lot with roof deck edition. So maybe we'll do a small one on that.
Mm-hmm. We can squeeze in. We'll squeeze in one more. I would say, how's the closing impacting the timelines for current projects? Do you have any idea on the board will reconvene? Rach, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I think timeline-wise, what I've been telling people and what I heard on the BIA call was like, if you can get everything submitted into L&I now, all you'd have to wait on is to submit your appeal. Like, we can draft your appeal if I get a refusal. Submitting your appeal, you will significantly shorten your timeline than waiting until the city opens to submit. So I would spend the time now getting your architectural drawings together, get it submitted through Eclipse, get us the refusal and start, so that all you're waiting on is ZBA. They've been talking about, May and June, reopening. I think they're figuring out now procedurally how to do it. They don't want to have a ton of people in the rooms anymore, for ZBA, but we don't have a definite timeline. But what I would say, especially because they're seeing probably about, only 25% of the volume they're used to seeing, is that you're probably getting things reviewed a little bit quicker now, even though they're on a shorter stuff. Most of the examiners are working. So my advice to you, and what even Betsy Baldwin had mentioned, who is like the go-to for all this, is get all your stuff submitted on Eclipse now, and then your timeline will be even shorter.
Great.
Great. And then
Well,
Brian, I do see a few more questions. So how do we want to
Yep.
answer these?
Yeah, so I put in the, I'll put it here one more time, just in the message section of the chat here on Zoom, but I also put it on the Facebook group. There's a link for a form you can fill out, just put your name, email, and then we're going to answer anything that comes through the week on the next call. And also obviously anything live that we can squeeze in, but I do want to be conscious of everyone's hour here. But we will be back next week. I don't know if we came up with the topic yet, but I think if you guys could get us some topic suggestions, by tomorrow end of day, I think we can put together a nice, presentation again for, next Thursday at 2 p.m.
Great. Awesome.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much, Scott, Rach, Adam. Thank you for dropping your knowledge as always. I appreciate it. I know that
anybody
appreciates it.
Our contact information's on the last page, so if we didn't get to you, just let us know.
Yep. Great. Well, everyone, enjoy your week. See you in 7 days. Be safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.